In this video, we're going to be looking at the sutures of the skull. Sutures are immovable joints that connect bones together in the skull. Now, when we look at sutures, we can see that there are sutures all over the skull. We're going to focus on the four largest sutures. The first runs across the top of the skull and connects our frontal bone to the two parietal bones. This suture is known as the coronal suture. Corona in Latin means crown. The suture got its name because Roman emperors used to wear leafy crowns that would run across the coronal suture. Joining the two parietal bones to each other and running through the sagittal plane, remember sagittal plane divides the body into left and right, we have the sagittal suture. Sagittal comes from the Latin word sagittus, which means arrow. So if you imagine an arrow going through the skull here, it's running through the sagittal plane. On the sides of the skull, we have this suture, which is the squamous suture. Squamous means flat, comes from the Latin word squama, which means scale-like. And if we look at the side of the skull, it looks relatively flat. If you touch your temples and above your ear, that part of your skull is pretty flat. Our squamous suture attaches the temporal bone to our parietal bone on each side. The last suture we need to see, we have to look at the back of the skull. When we look at the back of the skull, we can see this kind of upside down V shape. Now, if you know your Greek alphabet, the letter that looks like an upside down V is the letter lambda. So when anatomists saw this suture, they called it the lambdoid suture, which literally means shaped like lambda or shaped like an upside down V. The lambdoid suture joins the occipital bone to the two parietal bones. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly is this little line here? This is actually an extra suture line that's creating an additional bone on the skull. This is called a sutural bone or a Wormian bone, but we don't need to know that for our lab.